Authentication attacks are specific types of attacks that focus on taking over logon sessions or stealing user credentials. There are several types of authentication attacks, including spoofing, man-in-the-middle attacks, replay attacks, and session hijacking attacks. Spoofing is when you alter or manipulate the source and destination addresses of packets before they're transmitted over the network. There are two primary reasons to do this. One is to hide the source of an attack so that the attacker is not as easily discernible. And number two is to bypass or circumvent security mechanisms. But there's more than just packet spoofing. There's also site spoofing. Site spoofing is where you alter traffic in such a way that legitimate sites, such as websites, web servers, FTP servers, email servers, and the like, are unable to receive legitimate traffic, and viewers or visitors to those sites are unable to reach them. Instead, you move the traffic or redirect the traffic to another location, or you provide false information, or provide a seemingly legitimate front type of site so that people will submit to you confidential or secret information. One specific type of site spoofing that you may have already encountered before is spam. If you've tried to respond to spam messages and gotten unable to deliver responses from email servers, more than likely the source address of that spam was spoofed. Another and third type of spoofing is identity spoofing. This is where you assume the identity of another user or person. And there are two primary types of identity spoofing. One is masquerading, the other is impersonation. Masquerading is where you use someone else's logon credentials to log on to a secure computer system. This is considered a passive type of attack. The other type of attack is impersonation. This is where you've captured some type of authentication traffic and then you're replaying it to regain access to the session that the user may have had before. This is considered a more type of active attack because you have to capture traffic in the first place in order to replay it to impersonate somebody. There are countermeasures to packet spoofing, site spoofing, and person spoofing. Number one is address filters. This is where you will prevent spoofed packets from entering your network from outside your network. Let me draw you an example of what I mean by this. When you want to prevent spoofed packets from entering your network, you typically have a router or a firewall on the outside of your environment. You can think of a router as a simple device with an indoor and an outdoor. The indoor is connected to all your internal, private, and trusted environments. So this is where things are trusted. Your outdoor is your untrusted environment, maybe the internet. If you receive packets coming in the outside door that claim they are from the inside, you are guaranteed that this is a spoofed packet and should be dropped and not allowed into your environment. Because how can a packet from outside be from someone on the inside? It's not possible because those doors are physically separated in the environment. So address filters help you manage and prevent spoofed packets from entering into your environment. You can also use certificates to prove identity, and you can use encrypted protocols such as IPsec in order to encrypt the traffic so it's harder for someone to spoof. Another type of attack is called a man-in-the-middle attack. This is a type of attack where communications between partners are intercepted by a third party. Man-in-the-middle attacks are commonly used to steal credit cards, online banking credentials, or other types of confidential or sensitive and secret information. Let me draw you an example of what a man-in-the-middle attack looks like. You have a client and a server. The client typically will authenticate and communicate with the server directly. When a man-in-the-middle attack occurs, a third entity is placed into and between the client and server logically. You convince the client to authenticate with the man-in-the-middle or attacker system. And then that person, the attacker, then uses the credentials stolen from the client to then authenticate with the server. The client perceives that they are still communicating directly with the server, but they're not. They're actually communicating with the attacker, and the attacker is then transmitting material back to the server. This allows the attacker to not only copy all the packets that it receives from the client and sent back from the server toward the client, he's also able to change and manipulate those packets as needed in order to fool the client and the server into thinking they're communicating with each other or to hide information that either one gathers from the other. Some countermeasures to a man-in-the-middle attack include using encrypted communication protocols like IPsec, using certificates, and requiring mutual authentication. This will help ensure that communications between the client and the server or any other two communication partners cannot be intercepted or diverted by an attacker trying to perform a man-in-the-middle attack against you. Another type of authentication attack is a replay attack. This is where the initial authentication traffic or logon credential transmissions is captured by an attacker and then replayed. Let me show you an example of how this looks. The client transmits their logon credentials to the server, but the attacker watches this and records these packets. At a later time, when the client has removed himself from the environment, the attacker retransmits those authentication packets back to the server and reestablishes the communication session. It's then able to use the same type of access the client had, but it now has access. So it has unrestricted access to the server. Some countermeasures to replay attacks include timestamps and sequencing requirements. Timestamps mean that packets can be used only within a specific time frame, and if they're used outside that time frame, they're automatically rejected. Sequencing requirements means that packets have a specific sequence number. If they're arrived or used out of sequence with other packets on the network, they're also considered illegitimate and dropped by the server. A fourth type of authentication attack is a hijacking attack. This is where an attacker takes over a current session from a client and basically boots the client off from the session. Let me show you an example of what that looks like. In a hijacking attack, the client is communicating with the server. The attacker steps in, takes over the session, and breaks the connection with the original client, so that now the attacker has taken over the session that's going on initially with the server. Once again, this is another extension of the man-in-the-middle attack, and it has similar countermeasures to replay attacks, which includes using encryption protocols, certificate mutual authentication, and also including randomized sequencing mechanisms so that the attacker cannot guess what's the next sequence of packet and will have a more difficult time of actually waging this type of attack.